Greg Rust, welcome to 2020 Revision.
It's nice to chat with you again, my friend. We worked together many moons ago at 2GB when we were both young whippersnappers in media. And one of the first podcasts I ever did was with you when you sort of set out on this venture. So it's nice to kind of check back in again.
It's been a long journey for both of us. So you're a sports broadcaster based in New Zealand these days, and I guess most people would kind of recognise you as the long-time face of motorsport in this country. Take us through your 2020, Rusty.
So, I mean, to wind the clock back even a fraction further, Ralph, I had a kind of major life change at the end of 2017. My wife is originally from New Zealand, from the east coast of the North Island, a place called Hawke's Bay, which is a little bit like Yarra Valley or Hunter Valley by the sea. It's a lovely, lovely spot. Lots of vineyards and things in the area. We'd come here many, many times over, the past 20 years or so back to see her folks and things like that. And we decided at a point of change in my kind of work life, I was going more freelance rather than being aligned to one sport or one network, that we wanted to have a decent sort of lifestyle change. So our kids were just about to hit high school at this point. So it was either then or after high school. We wouldn't do it to them during high school. So we made the big move. I've done 2 great stints with supercars, which I loved immensely. I fundamentally freelance now, mainly around motor racing still, which is my passion, as you know. And so in 2018 and 2019, I was on the plane all the time, going backwards and forwards across the ditch. Some stuff here in New Zealand, regular stuff in Australia, where I'm still very much a proud Aussie, but this country has very kindly welcomed me with open arms. So I'm in a great space between the two, if you like. But that's all stopped. I was at the Australian Grand Prix in Melbourne on the Friday when COVID really started to take hold. The Grand Prix itself was cancelled. We'd had one day of broadcasting on the Thursday, which was only support activity. The Formula One cars themselves never even hit the track. And the next thing you know, the event had been cancelled, which is just unheard of. And I came back to New Zealand on the Sunday, and I've been here ever since, Ralph. So 2 plane flights in that time. One was for a birthday trip away with the family to Queenstown. So it's been a weird feeling, mate, if I'm honest. Yeah. But lots of people have probably spoken to you about the way you shift and the term pivot, which people have talked about immensely. But I think there's been some unusual positives that have come out of this thing. I've had some wonderful time with my teenage daughters that ordinarily I'd be away working, and that's time that I'll never get back. So I'm proud that I've been able to be here for some key things, mate. Dance concerts, school socials, you name it. There's been some good positives like that for sure.
I guess that's what most people are trying to get out of this year, which has been difficult on a number of fronts. It's just trying to recognise those things that if you mentioned there, that they've been able to sort of reconnect in many ways with families. Let's look at the whole New Zealand situation. I mean, they were kind of, as a country, on the forefront in terms of what looked to be a really strict and difficult decision to make to lock down early. And as time went on, it proved to be a bit of a masterstroke in terms of showing the rest of the world how it could be done to control this thing that was, out of control. And we're still not, out of the woods by any stretch of the imagination, but a small population, the fact that there are no states involved in New Zealand, and Jacinda Ardern kind of looked like a bit of a genius.
She did a very good job. The entire government, and for that matter, the country. Everybody, when you went to the shops and you had to observe, the 2 metre or 1.5 metre distance rules, or when they recommended people wear masks, and I've not really witnessed any stuff where people have rebelled against that, or by and large, everybody helped and cooperated and did their bit. So you're right, they went for an elimination strategy. It was a good move, and aided by the fact that it's an island nation, only 5 million people, probably easier to do than in Australia in that sense. It wasn't without its glitches. It definitely had some hiccups along the way with another lockdown happening for Auckland, and it came up a level for the rest of the country, but nothing that really impeded us from leading a normal life. So you're right. We had that 4 to 5 weeks of proper lockdown back in about April. They moved quickly on that. When they got to a number, I think they'd seen other countries around the world, and they realised that, from a curve point of view, once you got to a certain number, that it could explode. So they stepped in, moved quickly. Bit of pain in that for everybody from an economic standpoint and even just a socialisation standpoint. But it was definitely the right call, and I feel very fortunate. As I said before, I'm a proud Aussie, mate. That'll never change, but I'm very fortunate to be where we are here. It is normal here. I've been on plane flights for work in the past week. We can go to a restaurant if we want to. There's no, if I fly on a plane, they recommend masks and things like that. And they are very strict when it comes to people coming and going from the country and quarantining in and around that. But as within the bounds of our island bubble, our North and South Island bubble, if you will, it's just normal, mate. Life is normal here.
So coming back from the Grand Prix, as you mentioned, what were the initial things that you were concerned about, or what were the challenges that you first encountered when it was still all pretty fresh and new, and there was a lot of fear that was going on, and how will we handle it and so forth?
It hit home for me because a crew member from the McLaren team was diagnosed with it. They were then worried about other people in the McLaren team, or those that had been around the team, either for, in a media sense like us, if we had interviewed anybody at McLaren, the tyre technicians that work with them, staff from the Grand Prix Corporation, whoever. So they had to move to sort of recommend some people, not everybody, isolate. There were members of the team in my hotel that I was staying in. So it was it became quite real then. You'd heard stories about things overseas happening, and there'd been a few cases that had crept into Australia, but it really wasn't front of mind. But when you cancel a massive Australian sporting event, I mean, it takes millions and millions of dollars, as you know, Ralph, to stage this thing. I mean, that's not an easy decision to make. It was one of the biggest press conferences I've ever been to. It was held outside the back area, the entrance area to the pit lane, if you will, what we call the Formula One paddock. And I don't think I've ever seen as many journos and cameras and microphones in a scrum ever. It was a huge donut, if you will, of people. And in the centre were the core people from Formula One management, from team representatives to the Australian Grand Prix Corporation, of course. It was not a light or easy decision that they were making. So yeah, it really hit me then when it was cancelled. It was surreal, mate. And then I still had accommodation. I stayed on the accommodation for about 48 hours. Greg Murphy, who's a good friend, the 4-time Bathurst winner, he and I live not far from each other here in New Zealand. He came home straight away, and he rang me and he said, "Hey, mate, this thing's going to get bad. You better get home. Come home." And I cancelled or postponed. I had an interview on the Monday scheduled with Eric Banner for the podcast that I have. I have as you know, made an automotive and motor racing based podcast called Rusty's Garage, and I was really excited. It had taken a long time to piece that together, the chance to talk to a Hollywood star who's properly into cars and things like that, and I had to postpone it, which they were very understanding about. I mean, Eric was basically in Melbourne for this big lockdown and unable to go and work on some movie projects overseas that he'd been involved with, but which we'll get to here in the conversation. We've figured out a way to do podcasts a bit like you and I are doing now, via Zoom and via other methods. And there are ways that you can do it to still enhance the quality of the audio discussion for the listener, so it's not impacted, and you find ways, mate. But yeah, that the Grand Prix was when it really hit me. And coming home, I didn't have to, but they recommended, I got home, I got back into New Zealand 6 hours prior to a new regulation kicking in about quarantining. So technically I didn't have to. I elected to though. So I'm in my office here talking to you, but I stayed in the spare room for basically a fortnight just in case anything went wrong. I didn't have to do that. That was weird, being away from the kids. I was staying, quite a distance from my wife and stuff like that. But yeah, mate, I'd rather just take those steps and be a little on the safe side.
Everyone sort of has their unique tale, and that's certainly one in itself. When you look at it from a work point of view? I mean, you mentioned sort of it being a challenging period because you're existing in that freelance life, but within sort of desperation comes inspiration, and sort of working out how to make yourself busy and how to create content in a lockdown situation. I guess people were kind of looking for entertainment. So with the podcast that you have and different things that you're able to do, that pivot word and the transition and all of these things come into play, and it's almost virtually inbuilt in most people that you're able to switch and think, how can I make myself productive in this situation?
And I think the drivers in all that are multifaceted. So, first thought is, got a family, want to put food on the table, that's normal. Secondly, I love the interaction. I in the media caps that I wear, I do different things from, commentary and presenting and whatever else. But at heart, Ralph, as you know, I love conversation, mate. That's probably the key part of it. And that's why I think the podcasting side of it is something that I've really gravitated to. So I wanted to be able to keep doing that, to have conversations like we're having now. And although I'd prefer to be face to face so we could bounce off each other and have a bit more, you can see body language and things. I mean, Zoom does help with a lot of that stuff. It makes it a bit more natural. We're thousands of kilometres apart, and yet ideally it sounds like we're in the same room the way that we're having this chat now. So they're probably the two key reasons for doing it. And I've for the past 20 years working in the media, I've never not been busy, Ralph. So to sit around and have idle time, it drives me crazy. I can't do that. I have to be occupied. I have to do something. And lots of other people have had it tougher during this period than I've had. I can sit here and say, I've missed out on commentating that or going to this particular racetrack or race meeting or whatever. But mate, that's nothing compared to things that some folks have been through.
And when you look at it, like I'm very much the same, is like idle time is like you'd much rather be looking to do something and put your time into it. And I think what's also been recognised is other people have recognised the value in that now, like, being able to do things from that. And I guess through the lockdown period with the podcast that you mentioned earlier, more people became available because what else were they doing? So I guess
exactly.
That kind of opened up the door a little bit. You won't be able to do the face-to-face, which sometimes, as you know, can take a while to arrange, whereas a Zoom is just a link sent through, and if the person's sitting there doing nothing, if they're not, doing what we're all doing during that lockdown period, a bit of painting here and a bit of, house maintenance, they were suddenly available to chat.
And there was a thirst for that content, as you say. So, we were able to get to A-list racing drivers. Dario Franchitti, for example, who's won the IndyCar title and the Indy 500 and is known globally. I mean, we spoke to him in Scotland. We've spoken to all sorts of people during that period, and I've done it all from my little home office, mate. It's crazy to think that you could do that, whereas in the past it would have taken, in a TV sense, you'd have to tee it up, book a time. You might get a tight little 10-minute window or a 15-minute window. You'd need a cameraman, an audio person, and here we are. It's forced us to change the way we do it. We've got, a little simple microphone and a headphone set up, doing it via Zoom, and you can still have a cracking conversation, and people want to be part of that discussion. They want to because they're in need of that sort of entertainment. Podcasting in particular, it's been around for years, obviously, but its growth in popularity in this part of the world has taken off significantly in recent years. But I reckon if we sat back and looked at this COVID period and looked at the spike again, I reckon it's definitely gone up a notch for sure. People have gone looking for this style of stuff for sure.
And from most business point of views as well, I mean, people here, and it'd be the same in New Zealand, the fact that they were forced into a lockdown, looking at the way that they do certain things. I mean, there's a lot of time and effort that goes into certain business practice. There's a lot of, I guess, cost associated with renting office space, and the fact that people have proven or disproven perhaps the theory that, people would slacken off if they were left to their own devices at home. While working from home is not exactly a new thing, I think there'd probably be a few old school business types that were surprised by how things have developed and how much money they actually save by people not being in the office, but yet still being productive.
And ways they've been able to find new avenues for business as well. So, older people that may not have wanted to or had the wherewithal to go and do internet shopping before were suddenly forced to do that stuff. So that, that's now, I think, something that will become embedded in the way they go about their daily life. They still might want to go out and enjoy shopping in a bricks and mortar sense, actually visiting a certain shop, but I think they'll regularly do internet shopping now, whereas before they wouldn't get their groceries delivered to the door like that. Now they probably will. I still think there's a few weird hang-ups that we've got to over time get used to, and we still need COVID to be completely out of our lives before we can do that. But I think people, you can see when you walk down the street in the major cities, they're a little bit, they give each other space. They're a little bit nervous just in case. Some talk about, not everybody, but some talk about, it feels weird when you go to a restaurant now, or you go and do these things that you haven't done for months. It's a joy to go and do that again, to go to the pub and chat with your mates and stuff. But there is a level of hesitation still that we've got to get through. So there's all sorts of things in this, Ralph, that have changed us significantly. Many good things. I mean, I commentated my first online racing ever during the lockdown period, which is wild to think that I'm commentating on online based motorsport, which I'd never done before, and I was doing it all from my kitchen, effectively at home. I think there's, from a working from home point of view, there's a lot more people that I think will continue to do that, and even still are now. They might be other parts of Australia are much better now and back open for lots of different things. But many people you talk to are still working from home, aren't they?
Yeah, they are. And I think, as you mentioned, it'll take a while to sort of adjust to going back to normal, as it were. But I kind of think that normal as we used to know it won't be normal anymore. And yeah. I think that's probably the case of what you're experiencing over there in New Zealand. I mean, what's the general sort of vibe in the community as we sort of tick on towards 2021?
I love the fact that here there's a concerted effort to, to travel locally, to spend locally, to, there's that real passionate support of domestic things at the moment. I mean, if you want to, we've got the Christmas holidays coming up only in 4 weeks' time or whatever, over January. They reckon it's nigh on impossible to get accommodation in some tourist destinations, because it is, everyone's going, right, okay, let's get out there and experience and enjoy our own backyard, because we can't go to America skiing, or we can't go to Australia and things like that. Excuse me. So that's definitely a great thing. There is a sense of normality, as I said before. I mean, I'm walking around and able to go to restaurants and do those sort of things. But I just think there's a wariness that you've talked about a moment ago that's changed us forever, where we're a little bit, okay, far out. I don't want to inadvertently pick up something, and we shouldn't necessarily be programmed like that, but it's done that to us, hasn't it?
Yeah, I think the sort of focus on everybody's life from a different sort of standpoint has sort of made us, I guess, try to be a little bit more healthier in many respects. So if I was to ask you, what are you looking forward to most in 2021?
Hopefully getting back to a bit more travel. I'm very close with my high school buddies that I've known for over 30 years. So I haven't seen them face to face in ages, Ralph. And I turned 50 this year, and they had, unbeknownst to me, they had all planned to come and hang out there with their wives and kids and all sorts of stuff. And so we had a small gathering here, because that's all you could really do at the time. But I miss my mates. I especially miss my family. You would have met some of them back perhaps in the 2GB days. I'm very close to my mum and dad and my brother and sister. So they're all in Sydney. They're all A-okay. But I just normally, in and around work, I would, I'd come into Sydney for a job or whatever, and I might get the chance to have a meal with them or stay with them or whatever it might be. And I haven't been able to do that for what seems like an eternity now. So to try and get back to a level of normality, to hopefully get to some of the signature things that I love. They didn't have the Singapore Grand Prix here this year, and I've been to every one of those, Ralph, except 2 or 3. They've been doing it for 12 years now, and I love that event. Same scenario for the Australian Motorcycle Grand Prix and the Formula One race. And there's various projects that I'm likely to be involved in a television sense that are being talked about at the moment. So, fingers crossed those things can happen. There's lots of great energy around these vaccines. And the one in particular, I'm no medical guru, mate, but I've followed it closely along the way because you do in these times. But the one coming out of Oxford University that's attached to AstraZeneca, that sounds like a really good scenario or product in the sense of easy to transport, easy to administer, and so on. So hopefully we can get some of those things happening and get people back to a stage of being able to do what we want to do. I'm far from top of the list, I should point out there either. There's much more needy people that should rightly get that first. But hopefully by some point in 2021, it'll enable us to get that rubber stamp and open up borders and go and do things that we've missed out on doing for a while. I know my kids would love to see their grandparents on the other side, for example, too, and go and see some of their old Australian mates. So fingers crossed that can happen and get back to some more regular motorsport, which I love.
Greg Ross, thanks very much for joining us on 2020 Revision.
It's been great, Ralph. Nice to catch up. Take care.